burden of seeing clearly. There comes a moment in every awakened person's life when the world begins to look different. You notice details that once slipped past your awareness. You see patterns that others ignore, behaviors that repeat like echoes, and lies that once comforted you now appear as veils covering something deeper. You begin to see, and once you see, you cannot unsee. It is both a blessing and a burden, because when you start to perceive truth before others do, you also begin to feel an invisible distance forming between you and the rest of the world. From a young age, most of us are taught to see life in very specific ways. We are told what is good and what is bad, what is acceptable, and what must be avoided. We inherit not only habits and customs, but entire frameworks of thought. And for a while, they work. They give us a sense of belonging. They make us feel safe. But the moment consciousness expands, the walls of comfort begin to tremble. You start asking questions that others don't dare to ask. You notice inconsistencies in what people say and what they do. You start feeling as if you are living in a play, and everyone around you is reading from a script that no longer makes sense to you. That realization is not easy to carry. It isolates you. Because when you speak from clarity, those still living inside the illusion often feel threatened. They are not angry at you. They are defending the story that keeps their world intact. To them, your truth sounds like rebellion, and your awakening looks like arrogance. You will see this in friends who once understood you, but now keep their distance. You will notice it in family members who dismiss your reflections with a smile that hides discomfort. You might even see it in your own eyes when you catch your reflection in the mirror and wonder, why can't I just be normal again? Alan Watts once described awakening as being the only sober person at a party where everyone else is drunk. At first, it's amusing. You watch people stumble through their illusions, laugh at nonsense, and mistake chaos for joy. But soon, the amusement fades, and what remains is a quiet ache, because you realize you can't go back to being intoxicated. You can't pretend you don't see what you see. You can only sit there, clear-minded, watching the dance of confusion unfold around you. That is the price of awareness. It's not punishment. It's simply the natural result of seeing what others are not yet ready to face. The danger of seeing the truth before others do is not that you'll be rejected. It's that you might begin to doubt yourself. You might question your sanity, wondering if you've gone too far, if maybe you're overthinking everything. But remember, the world has always labeled those who see differently as strange, dangerous, or even mad. Every great thinker, every mystic, every prophet faced the same resistance. The path of insight is rarely crowded because few are willing to leave the comfort of illusion for the uncertainty of truth. Seeing clearly changes how you relate to everything. You begin to understand that most people are not really looking for truth. They are looking for reassurance. They want life to make sense in simple terms. They want to believe that everything happens for a reason, that good is always rewarded, that love always triumphs. But truth doesn't operate in neat lines. It dances in paradox. It reveals that light and shadow are intertwined, that love can wound, and that growth often comes through pain. To see truth is to stand at the edge of the mystery and realize that control is an illusion. So, what happens when you try to share what you've seen? Usually, people resist. They turn away. They argue, because your words threaten to undo their balance. The more you insist, the more they close their ears. And that's when the loneliness deepens. You learn that truth cannot be forced. It must ripen in its own time. People awaken when life shakes them hard enough, not when someone lectures them. So your role is not to convince, but to embody. Live what you've seen. Speak only when asked. Let your peace become the proof of your understanding. It's also important not to let bitterness grow in your heart. It's easy to become frustrated when others don't see what seems so obvious to you, but anger only ties you back to the same illusion you've escaped. Compassion is the bridge between clarity and connection. Realize that those who still sleep are not your enemies. They are you, just at an earlier stage of the journey. Once, you too resisted the truth. Once, you too needed time to awaken. So walk gently. The goal is not to prove you're right, but to remain kind while being awake. As you walk this path, you'll find moments of deep silence, where words fail. The noise of the world fades, and something vast inside you begins to speak in whispers. That is where wisdom grows. That is where the burden of seeing clearly transforms into the blessing of understanding. You are not alone in this. Many souls are waking up around the world, quietly, invisibly, like lights appearing one by one in the dark. And though it may feel isolating now, know that truth always attracts truth. In time, those who are meant to understand will find their way to you. Before we continue, take a moment to reflect. Have you ever felt like you were seeing something others couldn't yet see? Have you ever experienced that strange mix of clarity and loneliness? If so, leave a short comment below. Write, "I've seen it and I can't unsee it." It will remind you that you're not alone in this awakening. The resistance to awakening. Human beings do not reject truth because they hate it. They reject it because truth is disruptive. It tears down everything they have carefully built to feel safe. It burns through their beliefs, exposes their contradictions, and leaves them face to face with the unknown. Most people are not ready for that. They are not ready to have their foundations shaken, their assumptions questioned, or their sense of control dissolved. So they cling to the illusion, not because they love lies, but because they fear losing themselves. Alan Watts used to say that truth is not something you choose to see. It chooses you. Once it enters your awareness, it rearranges everything. It's like light streaming into a dark room that's been sealed for years. At first, it hurts. Your eyes burn. You squint and look away. But slowly, as you adjust, you begin to see what was always there. You see the dust in the air, the cracks in the walls, the forgotten objects in the corner. The light doesn't judge them. It simply reveals them. And yet, many prefer the darkness, because darkness hides the mess. It allows them to pretend that everything is fine. When truth starts to awaken in someone, the ego fights back. It says, "No, this can't be right. This is dangerous. Stay asleep." Because awakening requires surrender, and the ego survives only through control. So the mind creates defenses, skepticism, sarcasm, distraction. It mocks what it doesn't understand. It fills the silence with noise. It does anything to avoid stillness, because stillness is where truth whispers. You can see this resistance everywhere. In people who laugh nervously when conversations go deep, in those who change the subject when confronted with uncomfortable realities, in those who cling to anger because peace would mean letting go of their story. There is an old saying, "People don't fear the truth. They fear losing the lies that keep them comfortable." And that is exactly what awakening demands, the death of illusion. But most are not prepared for that kind of death. They would rather suffer familiar pain than enter unfamiliar freedom. The mind says, "Better the devil I know than the mystery I don't." And so the collective stays asleep, dreaming in unison, protecting the same illusions that bind them together. Think about it. How often do people attack those who speak uncomfortable truths? History is filled with examples. Socrates was executed not for committing a crime, but for asking questions that disturbed the peace of the city. Galileo was condemned for saying that the earth revolves around the sun. The prophets were rejected by their own people. The mystics were exiled or silenced. Every time truth appears before its time, the world resists. Not because it is blind, but because it isn't ready to see. Alan Watts compared awakening to standing on the edge of a cliff. Most people live safely in the valley, where everything feels predictable and familiar. They build houses there, plant gardens, raise families, and tell stories about the mountain above. But the awakened soul climbs higher. From that height, you can see the vastness of reality, the interconnectedness of everything, the illusion of separation, the endless flow of life. Yet from below, those in the valley look up and say, "You're too far away. You've lost touch." They mistake perspective for madness. When you begin to awaken, you may feel a strange desire to pull others up with you. You want them to see what you see. You want to share the clarity, the beauty, the freedom. But here lies the great paradox. You cannot force awakening. You cannot open someone's eyes from the outside. The light that awakened you must awaken them from within. And until that spark ignites, your words will sound like noise to them. You might even become the enemy, not because you are wrong, but because your presence disrupts their sleep. So what can you do? You learn patience. You learn to let people evolve at their own pace. You realize that timing is sacred. Everyone awakens in their own season. The seed of truth may fall on the ground today, but it might not sprout until years later. Your task is not to make the seed grow. Your task is to plant it with love and walk away. In the silence that follows, life will take care of the rest. The resistance to awakening is not evil. It's natural. Just as the eyes resist light after being in the dark for too long, the soul resists truth when it has lived in illusion. Be gentle with those who are not ready. Compassion does not mean agreeing with them. It means understanding their fear. They are not your enemies. They are travelers still asleep beside the road you have begun to walk. You once slept there too. Truth is powerful, but it can be overwhelming when encountered too soon. It strips away false certainty and leaves a person naked before existence. That is why it comes in waves, not all at once. The universe reveals itself in layers, allowing each soul to grow strong enough to bear the next revelation. When people resist, they are not rejecting light. They are protecting themselves until they are ready to receive it. So when you face resistance, remember this. Your purpose is not to win arguments or convert anyone. Your purpose is to live truth so deeply that it radiates from you without effort. In time, those who are meant to awaken will recognize it. They will be drawn to the calm you carry, to the peace in your eyes, to the silence in your presence. And then, without a word, they will begin to wake up too. The danger of seeing the truth before others do is that you might become impatient. But impatience is just another illusion. Everything unfolds as it should. The same intelligence that opened your eyes will open theirs. In perfect time, The isolation of the awake mind. When you begin to see before others do, you often discover that awakening is not an escape from suffering, but a deeper understanding of it. At first, you imagine that clarity will bring peace, that knowing the truth will dissolve confusion. But soon you realize that awareness also carries weight. The more you see, the harder it becomes to pretend. You can no longer laugh at the same jokes, chase the same distractions, or find meaning in the same empty conversations. What once entertained you now feels hollow. What once impressed you now seems small. This is the quiet loneliness of awakening, the realization that you have outgrown the dream the world still sleeps in. Many people mistake loneliness for failure. They believe that to be alone means to be unloved, unwanted, or forgotten. But solitude, in its truest form, is not rejection. It is refinement. When the noise of the world fades, when you are stripped of constant approval, you begin to meet yourself for the first time. And that meeting, though uncomfortable at first, is sacred. It's where wisdom begins to take root. It's where you stop being defined by the crowd and start being shaped by the silence. Alan Watts often reminded us that silence is not emptiness. It is full of presence. It is the space in which everything meaningful unfolds. When you stop trying to fill the silence, you discover that it has been speaking to you all along. The universe has a way of whispering to those who are quiet enough to listen. It teaches without words, guiding you through intuition, coincidence, and stillness. This is the stage of awakening where many people retreat, not out of fear, but out of necessity. They feel pulled away from noise and closer to essence. They begin to understand that isolation is not punishment, it's preparation. Yet this phase can feel painful. You might look around and see people celebrating ignorance, chasing pleasure, living in denial. And you'll wonder why you can't simply do the same. You'll envy their simplicity, their ability to fit in. You'll miss the days when you didn't think so deeply, when happiness seemed easy and love seemed effortless. But remember, ignorance is not peace, it's sedation. The joy you once knew was built on illusion. And while awakening may strip away comfort, it replaces it with something far greater: authenticity. You will begin to see that solitude is a kind of sacred space. It's where the soul heals from noise, where your energy resets, where truth begins to organize itself within you. You will notice that certain people fall away, not because they are bad, but because your vibration no longer matches theirs. You may try to hold on, to keep the old friendships alive, but conversations will start feeling forced. You'll hear yourself saying less, observing more. You'll notice how many people talk without really saying anything, how many listen only to respond, not to understand. And in that observation, something inside you shifts from judgment to compassion. You realize that you used to be the same way. Asleep in motion, speaking without awareness. The awakening mind eventually learns that isolation is not the end of connection, it is the purification of it. The relationships that remain will be deeper, quieter, and more real. You'll find yourself drawn to people who value meaning over noise, truth over comfort, depth over distraction. These souls may be rare, but they will recognize you instantly. When awakened souls meet, there's a silent understanding, a wordless recognition. You don't need to explain who you are. They already know. You speak less, but you connect more. During this stage, it's common to feel a sense of loss. You might grieve the version of yourself that used to belong everywhere. You might miss the illusion of fitting in. But grief, too, is part of awakening. It's the heart letting go of what it no longer needs. The emptiness you feel is not the absence of meaning. It's the clearing of space for new understanding to enter. Every spiritual teacher, from the mystics to the poets, walked through this valley of solitude. They learned that only in the silence of isolation can truth reveal its full voice. In your quiet moments, you may find yourself staring at the sky, at trees, at passing clouds, and feeling connected to everything, yet belonging to nothing. That is the paradox of awakening. You see that you are both part of the whole and separate from the illusion. You are not above others, just aware of what they cannot yet perceive. And that awareness carries responsibility. You realize that wisdom is not something to boast about, but something to live. The truly awakened are not loud. They are gentle. They do not argue or prove. They embody. Their lives become the quiet sermon that words can never express. So, if you find yourself walking alone right now, do not despair. Solitude is the soil in which clarity grows. It is the fire that purifies the heart. It is the teacher that no classroom can provide. You are not being punished. You are being refined. Every person who has ever awakened has walked this same lonely path. They too felt misunderstood. They too questioned whether they were crazy. They too wondered if it was worth it. And they discovered that yes, it is. Because once the loneliness passes, what remains is peace. Not the fragile peace of comfort, but the unshakable peace of understanding. The world will catch up eventually. Those who mocked you will one day come asking for your insight. Those who doubted you will come seeking your calm. But by then, you will no longer need validation. You will simply smile, knowing that awakening was never about being right. It was about becoming real. Living peacefully among the asleep. The final lesson of awakening is not about escape. It is about integration. After the shock of seeing the truth, after the solitude and the silence, comes the most delicate part of the journey. Learning how to live peacefully among those who still sleep. You begin to understand that wisdom is not measured by how much you know, but by how gently you walk with what you know. The awakened soul does not shout the truth. It lives it quietly, patiently, and consistently. Because the truth, when lived, speaks louder than any sermon. At first, this can be difficult. Once you see the patterns of illusion, you might feel frustrated with others. You'll notice people repeating destructive habits, chasing temporary pleasures, arguing over meaningless things. You'll want to shake them awake, to tell them what you've seen. But that impulse is only the ego wearing the mask of enlightenment. Real understanding has no need to prove itself. It knows that everyone is exactly where they need to be, and that no one can awaken before their time. Just as a flower blooms only when the season is right, the soul opens to truth only when it is ready. You cannot rush it. You can only honor the process. Alan Watts often spoke about this paradox, how those who try to save the world often end up creating more chaos because they impose their version of truth upon others. The wise person, he said, learns to dance with life instead of fighting it. You begin to see that people's illusions are part of their learning. The person clinging to falsehood is not failing. They are simply at a different stage of becoming, just as you once were. That realization changes everything. It replaces irritation with compassion and superiority with humility. You stop trying to convert others, and instead you become a mirror in which they can see themselves. When you live peacefully among the asleep, you no longer judge them. You no longer mock the dreamers for dreaming. Instead, you hold space for them. You understand that dreams have their purpose. They give shape to a reality that would otherwise feel unbearable. They allow the soul to play, to stumble, to grow. And when the dream finally begins to crumble, when the illusion no longer satisfies, that is when awakening begins. Until then, your role is not to interfere, but to embody peace so fully that your presence itself becomes a quiet reminder that another way of being is possible. This doesn't mean you isolate yourself from the world. On the contrary, it means you engage with it from a place of balance. You can sit at the table with the unaware without needing to correct them. You can listen to conversations filled with noise without losing your inner silence. You can love people who still live in illusion without being trapped by their chaos. This is the maturity of awakening. When peace no longer depends on who surrounds you, but on who you have become. Living peacefully among the asleep also means protecting your energy. Just because you understand others doesn't mean you must endure their toxicity. Compassion does not mean self-sacrifice. There will still be people who drain, manipulate, or take advantage of your kindness. Wisdom does not require you to save them. It asks you to discern where your energy is welcome and where it is wasted. Say no when needed. Step back when necessary. Boundaries are not barriers. They are sacred spaces where love can exist without being destroyed. Over time, you begin to find joy again. Not the shallow joy of distraction, but the quiet joy of alignment. You discover beauty in ordinary things, the sound of rain, the breath of wind, the rhythm of your heartbeat. All become reminders that life itself is enough. You realize that awakening was never about leaving the world behind, but about seeing it as it truly is. The world hasn't changed. You have. You now see the divine hidden in the ordinary, the eternal shimmering within the temporary, and that realization fills you with gratitude. As you live in this awareness, people will notice something in you. They may not understand it, but they will feel it. Your calm will disarm their anxiety. Your patience will soften their anger. Your presence will remind them of something they've forgotten, a peace that has always been within them. You won't need to preach. Your life will be your teaching. This is the ultimate expression of truth, to live so authentically that your being itself becomes a source of light. In time, you'll understand that awakening was never about separating yourself from others. It was about seeing unity beneath all separation. You'll see that even those who seem asleep are part of the same great dance of consciousness. The same intelligence that awakened you is moving through them, guiding them, preparing them. And just as the dawn eventually reaches every corner of the world, awareness will one day touch every heart. You do not need to make it happen. It already is. So walk gently, speak kindly, love deeply. Remember that seeing before others do is not a curse, it's a calling. It means life trusted you enough to carry light into darkness. Your task is not to convince the world of what you've seen, but to keep your heart open even when the world closes its eyes. In that openness, you become the bridge between sleep and awakening, between illusion and truth, between fear and freedom. One day, someone who is still asleep will look at you and see something they cannot explain, a calm, a softness, a strength. And in that moment, without words, they will begin to wake up. That is how truth spreads, not through argument, but through example, not by force, but by presence. The awakened do not push the world forward. They quietly remind it of what it already is. So live, not as one who knows better, but as one who understands more deeply. And as you walk among those who still dream, remember, the light you carry was once given to you by someone who refused to hide theirs. Now it is your turn to shine, softly, humbly, endlessly.